Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm so excited for this episode. Before I introduce you to our guest, here's a quote just for this episode. I have had the pleasure of racing with some incredible people for 4 decades. People who impressed me, people who are iconic to this industry. In my day, I was a hell of a race car driver, and in the pocket of a great market, I feel myself still in the cockpit of my own car, gripping the wheel and leaning into the turns. I know today what it takes to get the car up to full speed and to keep it there, throttling, racing, competing, and I know the sweet taste of victory. I wonder when I will no longer want to race or be around the buzz of racers who are pulling out of the pits onto the tracks and chasing the checkered flags of their business worlds. Never. I love the sport of selling, thin treads or not. I am meant to race. Our guest today is one hell of a business racer, friend of the Culture Matters podcast, gifted with metaphor, author of many books. One you know very, very well, Finding Honor, if you listen to the show. Others you should know, like um, High Selling, that we've been going through consistently over the weeks. Of course, Breaking the Cycle, Clear Boundaries, and many more to come in the future. Today, we're talking about Chapter 4, Thin uh, Threads of High Selling, with the one and only author, founder of 2020 Vision for Success Coaching, Lighthouse Advisory. And thank you so much for coming back, Christine Beckwith.
Thanks for having me. I love this chapter too, by the way. And I love the quote that you just read. And I definitely, the whole idea of this book is to grab a specific person and just ignite their selling soul on fire. And I've learned long ago that the language that a excellent sales leader speaks is much like that of a coach in a locker room with a professional athlete. I obviously use a race car driver as the example or metaphor, as you say, in this chapter. And you know, I'm the metaphor queen. I have found it to be a great way to teach because people have a hard time seeing the forest for the trees when they're in it. So when you use literal examples, they can't get out of their head of comparison to what they're doing or not accomplishing or challenged with. But when you make them think in similar realms of an example that have all the same components of learning or the lesson, they can see it. They have their epiphanies, they have their breakthroughs, and they can take the lesson and then like kind of lay it back over what they do. And Thin Treads is, this whole book is funny in the sense that if I were to be advised on political correctness for writing a book, this book would be like redlined, because it's edgy. It says a lot of things that go against formidable business acumen. Because I discovered along the way that the straight line was one way to get there, but likely not the most successful way. I discovered that the most successful people were not linear in their success. I discovered that most successful people had dysfunctions, which we unpacked in the last chapter, dysfunctions that they turned into fuel. And in this chapter, we talk about racing on thin treads because the demand for us to operate at the level of that place in your life world, business world, and personal world where you are racing on thin treads. There is no, perfect race car in our industry. And I use the race car driver as a mortgage loan officer. And what I've discovered is those guys that are sitting in their cars waiting for the perfect opportunity to get on the racetrack. I know so many loan officers that would they needed to know all the guidelines before they started selling, new to market loan officers. They could not sell well if they didn't feel like they had a complete set of answers. And the thing about that that's crazy is that every single day the guidelines change in our industry, the market changes. We are selling on a variable platform. There's a chapter in this book we'll get to called Off Wall Street at the Front Line. And I unpack the difference, the mindset of great successful loan officers that understand they are an offshoot of Wall Street. They're a representative of Wall Street. And so Thin Treads is about high functioning people in sales that do not need the perfect environment to thrive. I would tell you to stick a microphone in front of an NFL player right before the Super Bowl after a full season of practices, adrenaline running games, losses and victories along the way, heart crushing losses. And you look at that person who is physically weathered, but conditioned for the weathering, who is having to compete in a public eye, who has to face his critics every single day unavoidably, and has to perform at a high, excellent level. We take for granted the talent of a band that we go see that's on a tour, that's doing its fifth night of consecutive concerts on an 8-month tour, that we're watching them and expecting perfection and excellence in their performance with everything going right, all the coordination it takes to do things like that. Because excellence isn't viewed by most people for the components it takes to get there. And in fact, many people look at excellence in disdain because it's something they don't pray to. They look at that obsessive person that's striving maybe for, their highest as, something that is wrong in them. Like, why do they need the trophies? Why do they need the whatever? But I'm here to tell you, as a person that has reached my mountaintop a lot in competition and withstood 36 years without breaks, without time off, without any departure or return to the industry, just consistently being here, all markets, every day. And with the exception of a 2-week honeymoon when I was 25 years old and 2 trips to Italy in the last decade, I have been at the helm of my desk. And it's a unbelievable thing to get to that level of performance and also attract and retain people you want in your camp while losing people every single day to the disdain of people that pursue excellence. So this chapter is going to grab performers, competitors. It's going to speak to people about the selling soul. And I'm hoping this book just breaks through both tactically and from a mindset level. I give tactical information in this book, and we can talk about it in a minute. But so,
Well, in the opening of the chapter, you're talking about suffering from loss as well as industry shift. How do you pull yourself out of uh, how do you pull yourself out of a down cycle, internally or
mm,
psychologically when things out of your your ability to that feeling of control.
yeah. I mean, first of all, you have to understand that life and business isn't about consistency in terms of giving. It's not, it's a sport. You are not going to gain fulfillment from every single day. You have to take the downturn of adversities and markets as a challenge, because there's something beautiful that happens in those people that embrace the downturn. We had 600,000 loan officers in 2021, and we're under 100,000 now going into the 25 market, which is actually a
Whoa.
greater downfall than the 07-08 market, the impact, even though those two markets are different. Um, and I think what that shows you is that 500,000 people that serve this industry in its height either were ill prepared financially to weather a market that would last this long. And in fairness to them, that might not have been the only reason. It just might have gotten so hard they didn't want to fight the tide. Um, but man, what you do for yourself. I was watching the World Series the other night, and God, it brought back memories. My ex-husband actually started texting me, and game five of this World Series where it's 3-1, three Dodgers, one Yankees. And by the way, I'm from Boston, and sorry to all my New York people that are going to hear this, but we hate the Yankees. We live to hate the Yankees. Without going down a rabbit hole, um, I watched the night that Jeter, retired. And we're not a fair weather baseball fan group in this household because my partner, Corey Parker, was a drafted collegiate baseball player, full ride. And so we watch baseball here. And that World Series, when you start looking at stats, it's a great way to look at things because in a 7-game series, if you can only, if the Dodgers have won three, you're going into game four and you're like, they need one, then the Yankees get one. But in '04, we were sitting at the Boston Red Sox World Series and trying to break an 85-year curse of the Bambino in the early 1900s, 1913, I think. So impossible stats, hadn't been done. Down 3 games, and they need to win all four. Well, I don't think you need to be a mathematician to sit down and look at the likeliness of a 4-game win in that '04. And so Jason texted me and he said, how much is this reminding you of the '04? And I said, 100%. And I said, so we'll see what things are made of. I think market downturns are like that. The stats in market turns, and adversity is going to fall victim to those people that cannot withstand certain things. But for those people that stick out tough times, I still call upon my closure of H&R Block Mortgage, which during the time it was happening was absolutely devastating, as one of the greatest lessons of my life in leadership. Because having to not build, having to let the bricklayers stop, shutting off the cement trucks, we built for 12 years and then suddenly we had to dismantle. It goes against everything that you are. It's like asking a painter to walk up to its finished product and take an oil rag and wipe the paint off the canvas. Like mentally, it's death of that person. So I understand the psychology behind people that are selling to get into a place where that fishing hole dries up. I do address downturn markets in this and the tenacity, and I tell the stories of the hardest markets of my career within this book and how we fought and won those. I use jest at times to kind of laugh about how the younger group of mortgage people look at us old guys as, telling the grandpa stories of walking up hills both ways in the snow barefoot. But I give credence to like the young people or the old people saying, please sit and listen to your elders because they earned the right to tell this story. They survived that market, and it's good for them to recall that market. In fact, they've been really helpful to the younger originators in this market to say, this will pass, because you got to go through one to get to the other side.
What do you say to the person that thought about quitting yesterday?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to tell you, if I'm in this book, I repeatedly say I have no quit in me. In fact, if you knock me down, if I get knocked down, I always say, and I did a nice video off one of our episodes previously where I'm like, sure, I've been knocked down. I sat down hard a few times. I thought about quitting. I think that's natural. Um, but something in my mindset, and I think this is why I'm wired to do this and have done it well, for myself and for others, is I am willing to sit with you when you're down on the ground and say, how are you going to feel if you get back up, you fight, and you win? I want to know what that would feel like to you. would you feel like you accomplished something incredible? What would it do for your self-confidence? What would it do for your future battles? Now, let's talk about quitting. If you walk away because it's hard and you give yourself back some peace, and certainly you get to relax more and you kind of let go, where does that lend psychologically to your future battles? Because when quitting gets easy, you're going to repeat that over and over and over again. And there are
Mm,
serial quitters in life. Um, there are people that victimize themselves that are unself-aware. Um, I think I've had a lot of tragedy in my lifetime. I've had a lot of obstacles and hurdles. I've written about them in my books. I always say I don't think my story is special. I think I'm just telling my story. I think there's millions of people like me. I don't know that I was poor growing up so much as I grew up in a time where it was different. 75% of the world back then, they just needed to keep their lights on and have meals on the table to be considered thriving citizens. There wasn't, there was wealthy people, but it wasn't prevalent. We were living in older times where life was simpler. There weren't cell phones, and our day to day, we were present, living in our lives without connectivity to the world. The only news we saw was the local news, really. And so it's kind of subjective, but it was great conditioning. There's a reason why there's tenacity with older people. I can remember a story of my mom. After my mom had her brain aneurysm, she had been at her job for 30 years, but she was out of work for so long that they laid her off. And um, she eventually wanted to go back to work, and she was a parts, she worked in a factory where she did aerospace parts, and she was an assembler. And I can remember before that, my mother worked for her first 20 adult years, well, from teenager years into her adult years. My mother was an asbestos weaver.
mm,
So she would take cotton asbestos from huge bins that was in like the fluffy cotton form, and she would begin a thread by spinning it between her two fingers, and she would get it onto a bobbin, and then she'd put 20 bobbins on a machine, wooden machines that were propelled by water power below the grade, and she became a master weaver. And I can remember going in, and it was so loud. She had earphones on. She had a handkerchief over her face and head. She was covered in asbestos, as was everybody on the floor. She was running four machines. She stood between each machine was like 12 to 14 feet. And she was threading and keeping four machines weaving. And asbestos sheets would come out. These sheets were used to insulate piping before they knew it was cancer causing, obviously, and that all changed. But when her speed and multitasking and all that stuff, as a 60 something year old woman who now is going back to work for aerospace parts, she got hired on a team of like 28 people, and she was the only woman, all men. This was like 2008, and she went to work for a company that was a smaller company than the one she had been at. She used to stand on a floor with 100 people. This was 20 something men. They were allowed to smoke. She's a non-smoker, coming off a huge health recovery. She took the job anyways because she needed the money. And they told her to do 100 parts, put them in the box, and bring them out for the secretary to inspect them. And my mother did exactly that. When she came out to get the parts inspected, the woman said, "Where did you get these?" And she said, "What do you mean? I put them together. I just did them." She goes, "That's impossible." She goes, "This takes the average worker here 3 hours. You've only been at it an hour." And she goes, "I've been doing these parts for 25 years, 30 years." And she said, "Do it again." Young
wow.
secretary. She goes, "Go back and do it again." And while my mother was doing it again, the secretary kept popping in to see if my mother was actually putting the parts together. So she brought him back out when she was done, and the girl looked at him and she goes, "I'm going to have you talk to the owner." She goes, "I don't know." And it was like she couldn't make a call on something excellent. She couldn't see the excellence. She couldn't see the speed. She couldn't see my mother's age being 20 years older, the possibility of being better than her younger peers. And when the owner brought her in, my mother's extremely outspoken, and he said, we've never seen anyone in the history of this shop put parts together that fast and with that precision. He went through both boxes and she had not one error. She did 100% accuracy. And so his comment to her was, can you teach the other people how to do this? And she said, I can tell you that you would get more speed and accuracy if you didn't let them smoke at their machines, if you didn't give them breaks the way that they're allowed to take it. You got back to the 15-minute morning afternoon break. And she just like gave him a leadership schooling. And I just look at that example, and even though it's so far removed from what I've done in my lifetime, I've been that person putting out the 100 parts in an hour. All my life, I've been that person seeking my personal best. And I have to assume my mother was somebody that took pride in her work, who was smart, efficient, focused. She got a clock, for not calling in sick or being late for 20 years. There were 600 workers in the shop, and she won that prize for being the number one employee. And so those are things I haven't ever really talked about, but knowing that I come from my mother's genes, um, the staples of excellence are all there in the old adage. So this chapter unpacks the idea that we need to look at excellence. And it doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter its gender, its ethnicity, its age. We have to look at those people that hold the keys to excellence and study why and how they do it. You might find just tactical matter, but more than likely, you're going to find the mind of a person that's willing to race their car to the bitter end on thin treads. They are
Mm.
not operating in a perfect environment. They are operating as an excellent race car driver that's willing to take risk and push the car to its limits.
I'm challenging everyone listening to this, get the damn book. I didn't know that about your mom. That's makes a lot of sense. She's awesome. And what a
Yes.
badass. You
Mhm.
put somebody in an environment and they rise to the top. I think it says a lot about that's like statistics, right?
Yeah.
She's the top of 600. That's not just the 1%, that's like a couple over.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. If you're listening to this show, follow Christine, get the book, high selling, right? The subtext is selling.
Selling is a drug.
And we're on chapter 4. And man, what a powerful, they actually came back and didn't believe her, you're saying.
That's right. They doubted her ability to do it. It was like hadn't been seen before type of thing. And I love that. And I'll say one thing as we wrap up too, is in this chapter, because we just talked a lot about the philosophy of thin treads, but I unpack um what are you doing to restore yourself physically? What are you doing to build into a new future market? Do I have a race plan for this year? What's the restoration checklist? Check your workflow process flows, check your staffing, check your product line, check your marketing. And are you restoring yourself? So this talks about being a performer, operating on thin treads, and then it gives you the beginning of what this chapter finally starts to lead us towards the guide to excellent selling. And this chapter starts what's going to be a 10-chapter run of tactical advice that is bulleted, that you can take and apply to your leadership of sales teams. Um, I wish I had the reach to go into organizations today and take a look underneath the hood and say, okay, this 600-person sales team is doing 2 units a month. What do you want it to be to a CEO? And I had this job, and when Joe Penabianco, I think, somewhere around 2014, 2015, we had just cracked $5 billion a year, and we were in the annual meeting, and he didn't even let us see the numbers as executives before he unveiled them to the branch managers, but he stood up and said, we're going to do 8 million next year. That meant moving the needle from like 2.5 units up to 5. And um, I'm going to tell you, to reverse engineer from 600 seats, understanding what each loan officer needs for leads to convert to app, what their closing ratio is, what their funding is, what their margin of profit is, and hit those numbers, which we did. And we repeatedly did that every single year when he would move the needle. That is a big target to hit, but you can do that individually. And I've been doing that my whole career, and I'm doing it today. I want
Yeah.
to make X in 2025 in all my companies. I have to look at the components underneath. So there is a tactical part of this. Your race car can only run on thin treads if the engine's working well, you're in a safe place, it's fueled, and you've brought it up to speed like that and tested that. And so, anyways, I cannot wait to see what 2025 is going to bring. We have here at my company evolved our curriculum into all brand new high performance classes that we're about to go to market with huge ads. And I am excited because I'm about to take the body of work I just spent 2 years doing and get in the cockpit. I am actually going back in the classroom and I'm going to be teaching. I hope we attract a ton of top performers. We're looking for you. And yeah, let's fucking go, dude. Let's go.